Well, thank you very much, Akemi. And special thanks to the Oakland Asian Cultural Center for making this possible. And some of the original posters in this collection came from the UC Berkeley campus and from Oakland, and I've been wanting for a long time. I mean, this was 50 years ago, and I've been wanting to bring some of these posters back to Oakland. So finally, we've done that because of the graciousness of the Oakland Asian Cultural Center, and also providing us with this beautiful space. So I'll only say that well, first of all, thank you all of you for coming and your interest in the art of protest. I myself am I suppose, pretty much a lifelong activist, and I'll tell you the story about when I come to my talk about how this collection started or how it came to being. But I'll just say that we've done a number of exhibits. The exhibits of the art of protest were started around 2010, I think, was the first exhibit, and so they had been sitting in storage for all those years, and just had an idea that we should make these available to the public so the public can view them, and not just simply stuff them away in an archive, so that researchers can get to them, but it's not really very accessible to the general public. So that's sort of how it came about, and then we've done maybe a dozen exhibits since then, but mostly within Northern California. So with that, without any further ado, I just want to thank you all for coming, and I'll pass the mic on to Art. Right, okay.
Yes, we flipped a coin to see who would go next. So I guess I'll stand up, just because it's easier. But I wanted to not give a history of political posters by any means, but just review basically 5 approaches to posters that I found interesting. So it's not trying to be comprehensive in any way, but just how posters have been used. And I want to start with this International Hotel poster from the San Francisco Poster Brigade. Brigade probably was 2 people at the core of it, but call it Brigade. But this piece is by Rachel Romero, who was the main artist in the Poster Brigade. And the International Hotel, probably everybody knows the history of the International Hotel. It was a 10-year-long struggle to defend a Manila town hotel that was the elderly Filipino workers were being evicted, and the city fought it. Basically, the importance of this poster, I think, is the way it represents the people who are being evicted as the leaders of the movement. So thousands of people came out to support this. It became a huge event in San Francisco history, a long fight in which the mayor tried to use eminent domain to save it. The sheriff went to jail to refuse the court order, but the courts prevailed, favoring private property over people's lives. So they were evicted in 1977, and this poster was printed. You can see in the bottom corner here, it was printed at Inkworks, which was a collective. They did offset printing. Here was part of that collective, and they could print posters in large numbers. So it says, please post, not for sale. The idea of this poster was it's an organizing tool. There's a phone tree on the side here. That's how they got people together. They got people to join each other, pre-internet and so on, by having a phone tree. So poster as an organizing tool. Fast forward to the 80s, Mission Gráfica was formed at the Mission Cultural Center in 1980. And the Mission neighborhood was a neighborhood that was, at that time, primarily Central American immigrants. And so a lot of the idea of creating artwork for the at Mission Gráfica was coming out of this community. And 1980s was a time of revolution and struggle in Central America, and many people involved, including this artist, Maria Rosa Caldames, were part of this struggle. She was actually in El Salvador. I did this poster representing this very grandmotherly figure who was actually one of the main leaders of the Revolutionary Army. Other approaches to this idea of solidarity were actions, posters that were done for events and actions. Here we have a child care center in Nicaragua, a fundraising for that. This image references the folkloric painting styles of El Salvador. And so Mission Gráfica was formed, one of the co-founders, Josh Sansis, using a poster here for a concert as a way to raise money and awareness about El Salvador. And Rene Castro, an artist, another co-founder. Rene was a Chilean exile from the coup in Chile, and a large number of Chilean exiles were in the Bay Area. So there was like this attitude of trying to build a community of the Chilean exile community. Victor Haro was a musician who was tortured and executed by the Pinochet. So a series of posters showing this idea of solidarity, international solidarity. But then moving forward to 2000, San Francisco Print Collective, which was a group that formed out of Mission Gráfica, a group of artists that were much more about street art. They did campaigns like wheat-based campaigns and events that were more actions that were more directly related to local issues, gentrification, and in this case, they worked with the Western Regional Advocacy Project. Did this this poster is the motto of RAP, Housekeep Not Handcuffs, and this very simple image with this very bold iconography. Looking for how people on the street. Very clearly showing that a group of people are saying that there is so and another aspect of poster making that I wanted to emphasize was this idea of using a poster as a tool of information. This is another project with RAP, which they talked about. They did this research. It's very common. They did research for a book called Without Housing when they first started in 2004, and this took the idea of where this modern wave of homelessness came from, and the election of Ronald Reagan comes here at the top of housing and urban development spending and slashing of government spending, and the rise of homelessness follows. So it's an attempt to try to, in visual form, give a piece of information to something that might otherwise seem just sort of dry statistics. And then finally, to the San Francisco Poster Syndicate and the present, the San Francisco Poster Syndicate has worked with a lot of unions, including SEIU, USWW, which represents airport workers. And during COVID, cabin cleaners were unable to access, the unions were unable to access the cabin cleaners. Cabin cleaners who are represented in these 5 different languages on the poster were afraid of talking to the union. Their company threatened them if they talked to the union. They were behind security lines during COVID, and so the union was not able to reach them. So a lot of workers were getting sick and dying with COVID. So working with a series of a few cabin cleaners who would come forward, we were able to create posters to visualize what this, how they could feel as if they were seen. So we created 2 different posters, and the TSA security guards took these posters behind security lines. Security guards at TSA are part of the same union, and they gave them to the cabin cleaners. As a result, the cabin cleaners felt seen, and they actually came forward and talked to the union. By doing so, the union was able to file a Occupational Safety Health Administration complaint against the company. And it didn't end all happily, but they were able to file a complaint. There was more union solidarity. And it was a really interesting use of posters as an alternative way to do things. So those are 5 different ways I wanted to explain 5 different approaches to poster making. We're going to move on to Michelle.
The focus of my discussion is going to be I got selections from this book that we're all working on, called, 5 of us are working on. Jock Thompson, Robin, brain part,
Art, myself.
Art, and Juan, and myself, and Felix. And so I'm going to talk about the prints, selections from the prints of this book. So the first one is actually the cover, which was designed by Renee Castro, which Art referred to earlier. The book is going to be called Mission Gráfica, Reflecting a Community in Print. And Renee Castro, as you know, is the co-founder of Mission Gráfica, and it's his image that's placed on the front of the book. It's an ongoing project that's hopefully coming to its end soon, to document the contribution of Mission Gráfica between like 1980 to 2000. Mission Gráfica was a printmaking component of the Mission Cultural Center for Latino Arts, or MCCLA, in San Francisco, California. It's often overlooked by historical references to the political poster movement, and this book speaks to these omissions, drawing from the voices of those artists and activists who were active participants in the work of this important Bay Area cultural institution. This print was done by Domitila Ramirez, or Domi is the name. It was untitled. The printer of it was John Sanchez, and it was printed in 1985. It's a silkscreen print. She was a Mexican artist, Domi was, formerly untrained, who created a clean, kind of complex, figurative abstraction of her native environment. The scale of the figures, the colors, the presence of a dog, and the significant plant life kind of suggest an indigenous coding. But since this poster is both striking and kind of like a favorite of a lot of people who came to see it exhibited at the County and who have seen it in the archives of the Mission Cultural Center, I guess it's not that coded, because people are really drawn to it, and they seem to understand the aspects of it. This print functioned as a print rather than a poster. It has no text. It's untitled. And this is one of the many examples of how the process at Gráfica helped the artists express their voice, their vision, and their intent. It perpetuated a collaboration, almost learning and exploration by the printer and the artist throughout the entire process of it. So Domi was really involved in the selection of colors and defining the colors with the print jaws. And with other aspects of it, obviously it's her image, it's from her experience, and so it stands out in that way. The next image I picked from the book, what the next selection was by Esther Hernandez, Tejido de los Desaparecidos. The printer is Jos Sanchez, and it was done in 1984, and it's a silk screen. It's an abstraction with a lot of subtlety, and it has no text. So this print kind of used the traditional Guatemalan weaving to subversively display all these figures, male and female cadavers. The central one has a baby skull inside of her, helicopters, skulls, and blood splatters left by bullet holes. These are all symbols of the Mayan military massacres, the hallmark of the ongoing civil war in Guatemala. These beautifully and intricately patterned textiles are often used in repeaters like I'm wearing today. And they kind of become the ID cards used to distinguish groups of indigenous people targeted and marked for genocide by the military and police. Esther has become an icon for a lot of women printmakers. She's consistent in her commitment to representing women of color as leaders and activists in the struggle for peace and freedom. This next image is by Nancy Holm, International Women's Day, 1987. It's printed by Jos Sanchez, and it was printed in 1987. It's a silk screen. This poster was created for the Alliance Against Women's Oppression, which formerly was the Third World Women's Alliance, and Casa Puerto Rico. Holm's political images consistently depict a kind of a celebratory, they have a celebratory nature. They're real vivid and they're real positive imagery. Her images reflect the strength and beauty of the subjects. They're colorful and flat graphics, simply and clearly state the complex concepts and the messages that are contained within them. You can see a little bit of Nancy in her images of women. Perhaps it's a nod to her solidarity with her sisters. If you guys recall the old posters from the Chinese Revolution, where they would be of every nation, but everybody would look like they were Chinese in that nation. So it's interesting. I just noticed it when I was really looking at this poster. And they remind me a little bit of the Cuban prints from the 60s and 70s, that flat image, real graphic and real recognizable and understandable. Next image is by Juan Fuentes, World Women's Conference, Non-Governmental Organizations, Nairobi, Kenya, July 1985. The printer was kind of a collective, I guess. The Mission Gráfica folks kind of all worked together on it. It was printed in 1985 and it was a silk screen. The image is of an African woman carrying a bowl on her head with Xerox newspaper images of figures in the movement to abolish the apartheid system. There's Nancy Nelson and Winnie Mandela, there's Stephen Biko, there's women leaders and activists against the past laws in South Africa. It was done for the Alliance Against Women's Oppression, formerly the Third World Women's Alliance, and it was used to raise funds for Alliance delegates to Kenya. The slogan at the bottom is "A woman's place is in the struggle for peace, equality, and liberation." It served to express solidarity with women worldwide experiencing oppression caused by poverty, racism, classism, colonialism, imperialism, and war. Also, the non-governmental services was not or the non-governmental organizations was distinct from the governmental organizations, which were led at that time by Jean Kirkpatrick, which had anything to do with the absolute opposite of the statement that if women rule the world, it would be a better place, because these were actually pigs and real warmongering women. And that somehow seems to be the suit for every woman presidential candidate, with the exception of Josephine, who was the woman that ran first for president. with Mandela and one with Vice President. Yes. Ferraro. So, there's a real, it's real clear that the Alliance was originally not identified as a feminist organization because it was clear by these women that were heading the other official conference that they weren't interested in any kind of struggle against women's oppression. In fact, they weren't ensuring it. They were really warmongers during that time. Go on. The next one is Juan Fuentes, Many Mandelas. The printer was Juan Fuentes. It was printed in 1986, and it's a screen trick. The repeating images of Nelson Mandela represent not only the icon of the South African liberation movement, Nelson Mandela, but as a nod to the many activists spawned by his sacrifice and dedication to the overthrow of the apartheid system. As well, the prominently displayed red ribbon, the symbol of the anti-apartheid and divestment movements in the United States, reflects the joining of activists in worldwide solidarity. The print was part of a portfolio of artists organized by Renee Castro that was selected for the 7th Biennial in San Juan, Puerto Rico, of Latin American and Caribbean printmakers. It was the first and only time U.S. artists received an invitation to participate. Finally, the Juan R. Fuentes, again, Palestine Intifada, done in 2002. It's a lino cut. And Juan was one of the first artists, Bay Area artists, to create work on Palestine starting in 1970. While Fuentes did multiple posters for Palestinian groups, he was inspired by this image of the Intifada and the courage imbued by those activists participating in the uprising and the women numerous among them. The humanity of people is expressed by the women's embrace, the scarf worn by Palestinians, the liberating birds of peace forming the fabric, and the beautiful Arabic text. The solidarity Juan felt was based on his family's experience in migrant labor camps, and his family is divided by false borders, displacement, and the struggle for land rights. That's it. Phew, I can breathe again. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Is that too loud? Okay. My name is Joanna Ruckman, otherwise known as JoJo. I'm an artist. I've been an artist all my life, as long as I can remember. I'm also a designer, which, as you'll see in a little bit, has been very useful as I've become a poster designer, using some of those design skills. It also makes it a little bit easier to make a living being a creative person. I'm an educator. I currently teach courses in the multimedia arts department at Berkeley City College. So if you want to learn to make posters, you can come take some of our classes. I'm also an artivist. So artivist is a term that combines artists and activists. This is something that's a little bit new in my life. I've become an artivist around 2016. Before that, I didn't consider myself an activist really at all, but as you know, that year, life changed quite a bit. And I don't know if you've heard this term before, but I wanted to share a few words from an academic whose work I admire, M.K. Asante, from his book, It's Bigger Than Hip Hop. He says, "The artivist merges commitment to freedom and justice with the pen, the lens, the brush, the voice, the body, and the imagination. The artivist uses her artistic talents to conquer injustice and oppression by any medium necessary." So, I came into being an artivist through a connection to the San Francisco Poster Syndicate, which I met Art Hazelwood, my mentor and friend, who was teaching at the time and invited me to a meeting. And at the time, I was searching for a way to make more art that did something. That wasn't just art for art's sake, that actually had some impact in the world. And art can be such a great outlet for coping with anxiety around political issues, expressing anger, a need for change, a way to look for social change. So today I want to share with you a few of my posters and several key aspects of my own experience creating political art and in being an artist with San Francisco Poster Syndicate. So this poster, this was one of the very first posters that I created in 2016. The poster reads, "Women of diverse backgrounds gathered together on the US-Mexican border at sunrise on the morning of the Trump inauguration. In a powerful gesture of solidarity, they stood back to back, held hands, and wove their hair together in braids." So I wanted to also show this poster because it was a big part of my start, but also solidarity is such an important part of creating political art. It's a way of bringing community together, and the way that SF Poster Syndicate works, we help each other with designs. We help each other edit, we help each other figure out what kind of ideas read well and what doesn't. We share our skills. You know, if someone's a designer and someone else does woodcut and someone's good at the computer, we can kind of create images together. As an artivist, art has become a means to connect when political climates might seem daunting, as in 2016. Solidarity in the act of sharing ideas through images and printing. And this poster also went on to evolve into a mural that now lives on International Avenue, right by the Fruitvale Park. So I encourage you all to go take a look at that as well. So another aspect of, actually I wanted to say one more thing about solidarity is I want to take a second to express gratitude to all of you because everyone in this room is also part of being politically active, even just by showing up today and witnessing the posters, sharing the ideas, and you know, as artists, we are communicators. But if there are no eyes to view those artworks, it doesn't work. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to all of the elder artists and artivists in this room, creating such a beautiful legacy. Okay. So another important aspect that I've learned becoming an artivist and working with SF Poster Syndicate is this idea of accessibility. A lot of times art worlds can be inaccessible, and the way that we print with Poster Syndicate is in public spaces. We screen print posters and we hand them out to the public. And similarly to many of the posters in the exhibit, right? They are more accessible to people because of this process of screen printing, because of the materials that we're using. It makes artwork available to the masses. And that has been really cathartic to myself as an artist, where so many arenas of artwork are not accessible to publics. It's also using the technique of screen print, you know, allows this possibility of the multiple and creating as many posters as we can until our arms get tired. Is such a great way of bringing our ideas to the masses. So engagement. A poster is a tangible art object that can live in homes, offices. It can be wheat pasted in public locations, passed through hands. Oftentimes the poster syndicate will be printing at an event or in public places, and weeks later, I'll see our posters pop up in a variety of locations, whether it's taped in car windows, driving by, on a door or window of a home or office, storefronts. I even discovered once on Instagram that one of my posters became a tattoo on someone's body. So this way of images being engaged in so many different possible places. And continue in that theme of expanding art spaces. So as an artist, working with Poster Syndicate has been such an incredible outlet and cathartic relief from the limitations of so many other art spaces like museums and galleries, which can be a lot harder for the public to access. Also, in art spaces, our works are often seen as commodities for the sake of funding, profits, and artworks can tend to live as sort of untouchable objects, right? Living behind glass and tucked away in collections. And as a maker, it's been very cathartic to be able to make these posters that feel not less valuable, but valued in a different way, in their expansiveness rather than in their preciousness. I've also learned quite a bit about collaboration, the spirit of collaboration, creating art which has multiple authors and makers. Working with San Francisco Poster Syndicate, oftentimes, no one's name is on the poster. It is our Poster Syndicate logo, which, because there are multiple authors and makers, sometimes we'll have a meeting or gather together and brainstorm about ideas. And someone will come up with the text, someone else with an image, and someone else will sketch it out. And I think this makes us stronger as artists, teaming up and collaborating. Building community, of course, within artists creating, but also I want to mention that SF Poster Syndicate is open and everyone's invited to join Poster Syndicates. So if you want to join this community, and not exclusive, it is a spirit of educating. Oftentimes people will join, we're not artists before, but everyone has something to offer this community, whether it's helping us set up or distribute posters or come up with ideas. So, and this is an image. Just wanted to mention one of the most recent projects I worked on this summer with another organization called Vision Quilt, which we did something called Peace in the Streets, a Banners project. So this is an anti-gun violence organization that reached out to the community and has gathered hundreds of images around anti-gun violence. And we recently put them on pole banners, so they now live all along International Boulevard. If you haven't seen this, please go check it out. Between 73rd and 86th. And so just another way that political posters can be healing to the community and participatory and accessible. And this is a poster that I created for the banner project, and then San Francisco Poster Syndicate came and screen printed many of these images at the opening of the panel project. So just kind of wanted to leave you on this note of how political art is so important for all these reasons, but also as a way of healing and envisioning possibilities. We had gun victims creating posters, we had kids, reimagining possibilities of nonviolence in their communities, and using posters and printmaking, the process of printmaking to build and support our community. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for all that. It's really thrilling to see all the, the poster making activity that goes on in the Bay Area. And I'm still, meeting. There's so many people, like many of you in the audience, who have made posters. I may not have even met you before. So it's great to have this universe of artivism here in the Bay Area. And in the past year, I was thinking to myself that there haven't been too many paper flyers that have been made, and everything has gone online. And I counted because what I do is I still have this interest in this graphic art, that most of it's done by computer, and I collected them on my computer, saved them on my computer. There are about 300 just in the past year and a half, ever since George Floyd. I collected about 300 of these, graphic posters. But the silkscreen posters of this collection, of course, are just one medium of producing posters. And we sometimes take it for granted that graphic arts is something that just simply goes along with activism, and it hasn't always been so. And we go back to before the Second World War. There were periods when there was very little graphic art that was produced. I was in Tahrir Square in January 2011. This great uprising of hundreds of thousands of people. I took photos of the crowd, and maybe there's one poster or two signs up there. There were very few signs, so if you took a photo, you wouldn't know what that protest was all about. So it doesn't always happen. It's part of a culture that has to develop. It's a political culture and a culture of artivism. Anyway, we had the benefit of so that this happened at the opening reception a month ago, when the San Francisco Poster Syndicate and Art Hazelwood came here and printed some posters, and actually you can actually take a copy if you want of this poster. You created this poster specifically for this exhibit, so we now have something that commemorates this particular exhibit. But it's modeled after a poster that is in the original collection. And the original collection was 26 posters that I collected when I was a student in the late 60s and 70s at UC Santa Cruz and UC Berkeley. And these were simply posters that I saw on the walls. Some of them had even fallen down. And some of them were about events. And so, of course, if the poster was about an event that was coming up within a few days, I would leave it up, because that poster was there for a purpose, and it was a good purpose. And so I would wait a few days till after the event happened, and then I would look very very admiringly at that poster and say, well, the weather is going to get to it, and its purpose is over. So and there are several of them up, so I'll take one. And that's how the collection came to being. And so there were some from 1969, this was the year of it was the spring of 68, so 68 fall and 69 spring was the year of the great student strikes. Of course, we all know about the San Francisco State strike that lasted for 8 months, the longest student strike in US history. I was at UC Santa Cruz, and there were strikes off and on during that time, and these strikes really absorbed us as students. We really got into it, and we really spent meetings into the wee hours of the morning on this. And I didn't make any of the posters, even though perhaps my first interest as a child was art, but I never made poster art. I had to make flyers, but not these kinds of poster art. And this poster was, it's interesting to look at the origin. This one is particularly interesting because if you look at it, it's not necessarily obvious what it's talking about. It is saying that America, presumably the state, the powers that be, are doing something bad to our children, and so it's actually modeled after a painting by Francisco de Goya, where the Greek god is devouring his children, and then the children, the myth goes that the children then break out of him, their father who has devoured them, and they slay the father. So it's a victory of the oppressed, and this was made on the occasion of a protest against the Oakland Induction Center. So this was the military ground. The Oakland Induction Center was the intake point for all young men in the entirety of Northern California. So it was a big thing. I don't want to spend too much time going through the individual posters, but I thought some of them were really cute, modeled after the Schultz, the Peanuts cartoons, and this is Linus, with his security blanket, modeled after that. And of course, that's President Nixon, and then his vice president, Spiro Agnew, who was very, very critical of the press and wanted surveillance against U.S. citizens. The thing that I really love about this poster is its simplicity, because this is actually a flyer. This is a flyer about an event that's coming up, but has only, what would you say, less than 10 words on it. And yet it provides all the information for the campus community to know when and where and what this is about. Because everybody knew, the location of the quarry was the Quarry Amphitheater on the UC Santa Cruz campus. It was only designed to last for less than a week. And these posters were on walls, so these are photos of them before they were taken down on walls, and in this case doors. This is the door of the UCSC administration building. The chancellor's office is located here. There's the Quarry Amphitheater, and some of the posters give us some clues as to how they came about. So this poster came from UC Berkeley. It was a product of a great poster making workshop that happened right after Kent State, the killing of 4 students by National Guardsmen at Kent State University in Ohio. And there are other posters. If we go look at the archives, we find that there are various versions of this poster. And so this suggests that what was happening at the Great Poster Making Workshop, which was held in Worcester Hall, it's the School of Architecture, is that there was an instructor who gave this as an example and asked the students to make their own, make their own poster on the model of this design. And so these presumably were different posters that were made by different students at that workshop. So these are some of it's a photo that I took of one of the protests at UC Santa Cruz, where the students were holding signs that many of these were, in fact, silk screen prints. And so this is how some of them were actually used. And this is not in the collection, but it illustrates how, there are lots of very creative designs to show the militants and peace. Militants and peace against war. I showed this image because this was this reminded me. This is happened in more modern times, but it reminded me of the kinds of meetings we had as students during the student strikes. And at UC Santa Cruz, the largest meeting places that were available to students for an extended period of time. By extended period of time, I mean multiple hours. I'm talking like 5 hours, or more. Were the dining commons. So from between dinner and breakfast, that was the longest period of time. And that's when the organizing meetings would take place. And this particular one was the Poly Ballroom at UC Berkeley, where this meeting was the student council was hearing public comments about a divestment measure before the ASUC Senate. And it went on until 4 a.m. This is what it looked like at 3 a.m. It was just packed with people eager to make their comments. But that was the kind of energy that was there during the student strikes of the 68, 69. Of course, Kent State was a real landmark. And this poster, of course, was modeled after a very famous photo that went into the media. But of course, it was, and this was the poster was made on the second anniversary of the Kent State killing. But these are, those of us who lived through it will never forget, remember these images of Kent State. But what we sometimes forget is that there were 2 other students who were killed at a Black college at Jackson State, and one of them was not even a college student, and but they were killed 10 days later. So that was May 14th, 1970, and it just shows that there's something about our system. Of course, it was also the media. The media wasn't there. The media didn't cover Jackson State because it was a Black college, and the students there, didn't have cameras. And then there are posters about political prisoners and racial justice. And it's interesting how some of these issues, we're still fighting for these issues today, 50 years later. Okay, so these posters were printed on computer paper. So many of you may not, if you're young, you probably won't remember the fan-fold computer paper, but this is the kind of, these were mainframe computers. And there's a giant printer that stands almost as tall as I am, makes a lot of noise, and prints out reams and reams of paper. When I was a student, I had a computer project. At the end of the semester, I had a pile of paper that tall from that class. So And this is Sproul Hall. You see a lot of the posters on boards boarded up on Sproul Hall at UC Berkeley, and then the Student Union, and then come to skips to modern times because this collection was basically sitting in my closet for 40 years, and then we started collecting some more. So this was in San Jose, and this was in response to the upcoming Trump's inauguration. Is that we were going to rise up, and so we had multiple counter inaugural protests in San Jose. And then this was a poster making workshop in San Jose by the Girasol, and there are a number of posters made by that workshop on contemporary issues, immigration, war against Iran, and so forth. So, so that's sort of a quick overview of some of the highlights of the exhibit. But now I think we would like to we'll have some discussion, and of course, have any questions or comments, please feel free to jump in. Thank you.
I'll just talk really loud, okay? So this is very interesting. It makes me wonder if in the social movements of the 30s and 40s or 20s and 30s, there were any posters or anything similar as a communication tool.
Well, the screen printing, silkscreen really started as a poster making method in the 30s in the WPA during the Depression. And there was a part of the WPA program of the Federal Theater Project that had a lot of posters that were very dynamic, advertising different kinds of political theater programs. Those are some of the strongest posters from that time. But there were a lot of posters done at that time. There was a kind of wall after World War II. But screen print really came in, and although it was oil-based and maybe a lot messier than it has become, there were a lot of people doing it for a period of time. There's some great work. New Deal posters are quite well known, but a lot of them were done for popular purposes like food safety or something like that.
The display in the hallway had them on computer paper. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more. It just seemed like, I mean, I think of it as really thin. So I was really surprised that would be, was that a choice, a statement, combination?
No, it's a practical matter. The paper is free because there's so much of it. So, I mean, students don't have money, so they look for the easiest way to do it with the resources they have. And as I said, you could go to any computer center. Actually, there's only one main computer center in most campuses, but you go to that computer center, and there's a recycling bin. It's just filled with this stuff.
When we started with the San Francisco Poster Syndicate, we were based at San Francisco Art Institute, and we used a slot bucket for ink, which was in the screen for classes. Students mixed their purple and their green, and after they didn't have any more use for it, just throw it in the slot bucket. And the slot bucket was going to be thrown away, so all our posters, including JoJo's beautiful solidarity poster, has this beautiful gray tone, just for that free reason. I was thinking,
So with the advent of, social media and the kind of protests that, people are doing online, I think there's tremendous power and I've already seen the resurgence in posters during the pandemic and the protests, but I mean, like, how can you engage the community more to make visual art that goes up? Because I know whole idea of putting posters up is that I'm quoting somebody in this room, but you're taking back the, you're kind of taking back public space that's become, compromised. And it just feels like everything is too perfect and we need to like mess it up visually with protest. I'm just saying, how can we organize and be more, but I mean, that's what you do, Art, so.
Well, it brings up for me, the summer of 2020 with all the boarded up storefronts and, especially here in Oakland as well as neighboring communities, artists came out and painted murals all over the city and kind of reclaimed those spaces. And it is so important that the art lives in spaces where we're used to seeing advertising, where we're used to, being dominated by these capitalist mentalities, not just when we're staring at our phones, scrolling around.
I love what you said about wanting to mess it up, because it's also perfect. Because when I think about, these posters, a lot of the ones that you collected, Sharat, were we pasted up, they were put all over, they mess things up, right? They just sort of, that's part of the message, to destroy the sort of clean, complacent atmosphere, right?
Yeah, so the, especially if you go to these outlying suburbs, go to Pleasanton, I went to Pleasanton looking for murals, because wherever I go, I look for murals. And, there was one official one in the Civic Park, but other than that, there were none. And so, the sort of capitalist ideal is to create sterile neighborhoods, right? Everything looks really nice and new, and there are no murals. There's no art. There's no creation. And so even San Jose has a history of murals, not quite the extent of Oakland, but one of the beauties of the George Floyd protest was that with all these boarded shops, all these artists came out of the woodwork to paint this tremendous number of murals. It was just an explosion of creativity in San Jose because we had a situation where it was okay to mess things up, at least for a little while.
But there's also this atmosphere of the theater of the protest that I think is kind of changing. Ideally, a protest is changing. It's not a series of people walking down the street. That's a parade. It's a disruption, and there's kind of theatrical quality to that disruption. It can be very powerful. I mean, I think participating in one of those kinds of, like you were talking, Sharat, about some of the protests you participated in and the kind of the feeling that you will never forget those moments. It's not only what you saw, but there's a kind of a new kind of community is born out of that.
Yeah, I mean it's not just the creativity, the artwork that goes up on walls, but there are whole movements, there are whole organizations, the whole universe of organizations that grew up after George Floyd died, and in every, and I documented as many as I could, every neighborhood and community that was a tragic event, in response to a tragic event, but there was something beautiful about the seeds of George Floyd, say.
But I would say, I don't know, Stadium, Joyce talked about the same.
It's okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, sure. Why don't you do that? It's a little too late, but no, I just wanted to say that it's crazy because when I was 16, I traveled to Cuba on the first Vincent Brigade. And we saw the most beautiful posters. I mean, and we got the most beautiful posters by Shea, posters by Mandela, which were like 25 color, 30 color silk screens of the Vietnamese fighters going into Vietnam. And it was, I mean, they were so beautiful. I mean, I don't think there's anything to describe the beauty of the silk screens that I saw in Cuba, because they were with the old oil-based inks. So they had that velvet quality. They had millions of colors, but we didn't take care of them. So I'm really here to also to talk about the importance of archiving the work that gets done, whether it's real rushed and fast, and it archives it, it keeps history of movements and things that happen and events that are really important that people, students and people need to have access to. So when I think of all the posters that I threw under my bed or pinned up in my kitchen that were so beautiful and that I damaged, to be honest with you, that I think there's a real value to maintaining at least copies of that can be stored and chronicled and dated. And, you know, and I learned a lot of this because my husband was, or my partner, I should say, was implemented an archival plan for, or system for the graphics, the prints and posters of the Mission Cultural Center. So there's like over 1,000 prints that were actually archived. And it's really important because that's the basis of the book we're writing, to really tell our history in our own words, since no one else has chosen to do it, and treat this stuff with the respect that it should have. There's also archived posters that were shown at the De Young Museum. That's important. I mean, this is really important stuff. And it was beautiful. It doesn't matter how rushed the poster was or how neat it was or how tidy it was. I mean, of course, there's some differences in quality of work. And I think the Mission Gráfica stands out in that it's not just talking about the community issue. It's the style and the development of the poster. The aesthetic was really important. Oh, here we go. The aesthetic was important, and that's what was held up as a real hallmark of the work from the Mission Cultural Center. And it wasn't from just professional artists, it was from students. And so it really gives you the sense of multiples and how you can convey ideas, really complex, abstract ideas, freedom, liberation, women's rights. They're not easy topics. How do you do them? How do you conceptualize them? And who are the makers of this stuff that really stand out? And I remember some of so the Cuban prints were one part of that. But also I went to Berkeley, then I transferred to San Francisco State because that's where the action was. And there was so much beautiful work that came out of that strike. Rupert Garcia did these great kind of pop arty kind of prints that were like the man of the cream of wheat on the cream of wheat box of cream of wheat saying no more of this shit, or you had the Lipton tea bag guy of the porter or the whatever he was talking about tea as a product of colonial exploitation, and you had all kinds of iconic everyday work produced in real flat graphic ways that really made everyone notice. They were familiar with those things, but they were flipped and used in a whole subversive way. If those things aren't maintained and collected by not just collectors, but by schools and people who will give access to a history of people, it's really a disservice to not do that. So I understand the point and the use of propaganda. You know, you can paste it. We pasted that night. I mean, we didn't do that. I mean, we did that a lot in the old days. We didn't care that it wasn't going to be maintained, but there's a value to also to chronicalizing, archiving, And because it paints the history of movements. It's not just a poster that we put up for a day and it, you know, the temporary nature of it is so important. That's important too. I mean, because it functions in that way, at least it does, or you don't expect it to be maintained, but those are really important for our history of our activists to come, you know. So I'm really like, I learned that I really squandered a lot of things that were very valuable because I didn't know that archival paper was so important and that things just degrade and they disintegrate and they get screwed up by all the pins you push in them. You know, that's something we have to do. I mean, maybe the posters you distribute, you have no control over, and sometimes you don't care if they're posted in somebody's kitchen. But to at least keep copies of that stuff to chronicle them for future generations of printmakers, I think it's really important.
But also pin them up in your kitchen.
Sharat, you want to say something about that idea of like preserving history beyond, I mean, what is the value? We talked earlier about this idea. What is the value of the poster for a later generation?
Well, it's about telling the later generations that because they're, you know, we have struggles now, there were struggles in the past, there will be struggles in the future, right? And for the future generations who will engage in struggle, it's very important. It's reassuring for them to know that they're not the first to do this, and there is a long heritage. It's part of our heritage as human beings to have a history of struggle and artivism, and so I think it will help reinforce. It will help reinforce them that what they are doing, what they believe in, you know, what they're doing is right. And you know, I can go on because I've known a number of movements that, and like there was a movement in India for the tribals in central India, and it is a movement called itself the Chhattisgarh liberation struggle, and they created a well, there were some vague notions that there was a historical figure who led the struggle against the British and against the non-tribal landlords, and but what they did is that they built that into a legend, even though it wasn't fully true. But creating they had to create or recreate, I should say, a heritage of struggle. But that was a very important factor in reinforcing the movement. So I think that for that reason, it's important, and also just to know our history, to be able to document our history in art as well as words.
You had a question?
I just wanted to stress the fact that solidarity and protest movements have there's been a cultural component from the beginning. I was thinking of the IWW, the Wobblies, and the amazing graphic tradition that they created in their little newspapers and flyers and leaflets, and the banners that they made, and the music that they created. I mean, I think that this kind of cultural flowering of protest has been with us forever. I mean, the Goya piece that you showed earlier is testimony to that. I mean, culture is really, really important in making struggle work.
I actually was looking at the Glasgow demonstration today. Looked like every single person was carrying a poster. There was a lot of posters. all kinds of different ones, and looking through the crowds just to see the different signs was amazing. A lot.
Tomorrow in Sproul Plaza at UC Berkeley, the youth movement against climate change is having an action from 11:30 to 1 o'clock. Anybody wants to go there for that collection posters, right?
Right.
Yep.
I just want to mention the radical printmakers of Mexico in the 30s, the Italian graphic popular, can't say it, but great artists who made political works that they put up everywhere because a lot of the populace didn't read, and they did images, and they wheat pasted and they collected, and a lot of American artists, or not a lot, but a number of American artists went down and studied with them, and especially after the war, and learned and brought it back here, especially to the Bay Area, with the graphic arts workshop and other printmakers that were politically active. And I just want to give them a nod because I think they influenced a lot of what we see today in this area.
I think that cross-cultural seeding is really important as we with the Taller de Gráfica Popular and the artists, including the artists who worked on backyard murals, Victor Arnett, etc., studied in Mexico. And then the Chilean artists who came here and formed the Peña Cultural Center. So this cultural exchange is important because we've lived it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another dimension to what you were saying about the importance of archiving. Because what happens is, the artist who created the poster is making a statement. And that statement is part of that individual's legacy on Earth. And I think that it's really important to recognize the contribution that each person can make. And even though they may be anonymous to the common eye, I mean, it's really important, I think, to have that person in an archive and place their work in the context of history, because history is made by individuals, and each person has, can leave their stamp on the world. So I just wanted to have a nod, acknowledge the importance of archiving.
Thank you. I think we're going to wrap it up. There are, in fact, 3 posters on the table over there. So take it and start your own archive. There's also San Francisco Poster Syndicate having an exhibition at the main library in San Francisco, and there's a part there that show it's up until April 17th. And anybody want to say anything?
Well, I guess, no, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and just an FYI, so there will be another panel like this on political poster art, because there's another exhibit of prints of, not the originals, but prints of the art protest, again at the San Francisco Public Library, and there will be, so that event. The prints are on display right now on the 3rd floor, but we will have an event on December 4th. But thank you all for coming.
Look for the book, Mission Gráfica, Reflecting Community in Print, that we're gonna be getting out some stuff. So if you provide your email here, we'll try to work with folks to kind of gather up people who might be interested. And so when we do a call for the book or whatever we do, we'll include you. So thanks, and thanks for being here.
Can I just say something to everybody, because I got an email today. There's an arts organization that's responsible for some of the murals in Oakland called the Attitudinal Healing Center. And a corporation brought the block, and they were told they would have a year to relocate, and they got a 30-day notice today. Wow. And this is their biggest fundraising right before Christmas. So you're talking about an organization that does do these kind of, in one of their murals, a young man was killed and he ended up being featured in the mural where again, they're responding. They're doing the kind of work that the panel was talking about today and they're threatened. It's called the Attitudinal Healing Center. And you might look it up and see and pay attention because they have 30 days to
Wow.
which could destroy them.